You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
We're talking with Lee Upton coming in here. Lee has a rabbit, so we're a little bit like in that part of the. But I wanted to introduce you, Lee, a writer, and in particular coming up this summer, a book called The Withers. Multiple styles or tones that Lee writes in, and I'm going to want to talk a lot about that. But Lee, welcome to Something Rather Than Nothing. I've waited to have you on here, and you're here, and I'm so excited.
Well, I'm really excited to talk with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe just like dig in right at the beginning too, when I was talking about and your poetry too. Not to be like just throw that out there. Your poetry, I love poetry, and I've been reading your poetry. Tell me about you as a writer, just in general, like moving between different styles, forms. You have comedy, you have like a kind of dystopian, the Withers. What's it like for you, and what's that doing for you as a creator to be like, I'm not this type of thing, I'm these type of things? Can you just tell us about that? Because I'm really fascinated about that piece.
Oh, well, sure. I write poetry and fiction, short stories, novella, and novels. Also literary essays as well too. But I love working among genres. I mean, it's kind of greedy in some ways. I mean, I just want more and more experiences with language and with writing. And I think of all writing as essentially a kind of experiment. So there's the sense that I don't always know what I'm going to work on, although sometimes I really tell myself I want to do X, Y, and Z. For the comic novel, Tabitha Get Up, I actually told myself I want to write a comic novel. And then I just would get up every morning and try to make myself laugh. This was during COVID for that novel. And it was just a kind of a difficult period. The family member was very ill during this period. We had COVID. And so I told myself, I want to create something joyful in some ways. And I gave in that novel the world's best bar, because remember, we couldn't go out to bars. So the character has a wonderful bar and has a lot of fantasies. So in that novel, it was really a case of deciding I'm going to write comedically for that. And I was very annoying. The whole time I was writing it, I was laughing at my own silly jokes. But actually, the novel that's coming out in June, The Withers, was written before the comic novel and before the mystery novel. It was actually written in 2017, the main plot I had. And so it was written before COVID, even though it's a kind of dystopian novel about an epidemic that in some ways was predictive of what would happen with COVID, but it's not coming out till this June. But working with multiple genres, I think poetry is a kind of foundational art for me. When I was a young woman, that's where I focused most of my energy there. And fiction, I was always writing fiction, but it was kind of on the sidelines. But then through the years, I've never stopped writing a lot of poetry and give my heart to poetry. But I think once you start working in another genre, you start somehow getting infected by that genre. It's very contagious for me. If I go into a genre, I want to explore more. So doing it there, I mean, it's almost like always being a beginner, but then it's always exciting, that exaltation of being a beginner and not knowing what will emerge. Even with the comic novel, even though I told myself I'd write a comic novel, I could never know down the line what would happen in that novel. And for me, that sense of adventure is what propels me as a writer and also propels me to experiment with different genres.
No, it's really exciting. What when you're doing like the Tabitha, the comedy novel, you're saying you're getting like in the frame of like trying to laugh and stuff. Like what were you doing? Like for me, I adore laughter. For me, at least not to be like too analytical, but like healthy wise, me getting like that energy blasting out and the air blasting
Mhm.
on my body is like so fun. So like I could totally understand being like what were you doing and like to like inhabit the comic space?
That-
And if you're annoying, this is for you. No, like tell me what you're doing.
Well, I think for me, that novel grew out of a rhythm. The character has a kind of way of talking, and as soon as I caught her rhythm, the
Oh,
first line in the novel
yeah, tell us.
is just, it propelled me. It's, I know every woman looks better after a divorce. I know every woman looks better after a divorce.
Holy
And
shit, that's a lie. That's an opening line.
that's her first line. And that's
Good on you.
uh, yeah, so that voice just caught me as soon as I could. As soon as I see, I'd written a short story that didn't really work. It had an email at the end of it with that voice in the email, and I
Yeah.
liked the voice because I think I measure the writing by a kind of energy, and so it was following through on that voice, that rhythm of how this character thinks in the world. In September, the sequel is coming out. The comic novel is
I
called
saw
Tabitha
that.
Down. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
sequel is Tabitha Stay Up. And I just wanted to experiment with her voice again. So I think that for me, moving between genres is so much part of just it's a kind of just going into the wilderness a bit to see what will emerge. And I've had the experience where I'll start out, for instance, with a poem that, but then it can turn into a short story. Or I've had multiple times where I've written what I hoped was a novel and I realize it doesn't work and I make it into short stories. So there's I hate to waste all that effort, but I never think of it as really wasted. I always think
Yeah.
something can come of it. I can learn from it. I also have a little mantra that I use in
Tell
writing,
me it.
which is
Tell me it.
welcome failure, come in failure.
Yeah.
And I do that because then I can be bolder if I already welcome failure. And it's because, especially with comic writing, you're going to fail no matter
Oh,
what. You can
yeah,
be
like
so
really, really
crazy.
expect it in that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, there's
Like,
a real markers that, and also welcome failure because characters have to fail in at least part of the time in whatever kind of writing I'm working with. And so in some ways I think of it as bonding with my characters. We're all failing somehow. And so I can follow them out and have a lot of sympathy for that urgency that people feel. We don't want to fail, yet any plot has to involve some kind of failure along the way, even if your ending is happy or there's some kind of conclusion where the world is set aright. Along the way, you're working with failure. So I do that to calm my own nerves, but also to just realize that's part of the business. You're gonna, you can't win everyone. Maybe you can't even win a small group. You just don't know. So you might
well,
as well welcome failure.
I think, not to interrupt, but like I think there's something within that, like there's the courage that's within that too, right? To fail, but there's also like there's this idea that I thought, like whether people are experience like some criticism or antipathy towards it, or like for me there's the kind of Buddhist concept is like there's your greatest teacher is that person. Your greatest teacher is the one who tweaks you up and gets your
Mhm,
back up and stuff like that, because there's a reflection back upon something that's making you really
mhm.
uncomfortable. And I always find like criticism being within that, like you have to get past this initial part of my French, like F off of like I
Yeah,
did that, I accomplished that, I took care of that, look at page 277, versus somebody being like, nah, or expressing, whatever, or it wasn't funny, or, and that's so difficult. That's so difficult in art, but it's difficult for us as a person. So I just want to like point that out, like that approach is like so healthy, and it's one that me over the years, like I'm trying to do more of that, of being like I can look like I think deep down sometimes like we don't want to look like a fool, right? We don't want to like
Yes.
look stupid or like haven't done it well, and it's a powerful thing for me.
Hmm.
And in talking to artists and others, it's like, yeah, that's you know got to work through that. Different question. When did you first see yourself? I'm going to use writer, but I talk about art in general. When did you first see yourself as a writer, or when did you first see yourself as an artist, creator?
Well,
When was
I think that I've written since childhood, and my undergraduate degree was as a journalist. It was in journalism, and I paid my way through college by writing for the Capital newspaper in Lansing, Michigan, the Lansing
great
State
work?
Journal. I was just a freelance writer, so I got
Awesome.
paid per piece. But since probably pretty early childhood, I really wanted to be a writer. I remember that we would get, I grew up in a farm in mid Michigan. We get the Detroit Free Press newspaper, and there was a cartoon about Brenda Starr, girl reporter, and I thought, oh, maybe there's a world for me where I can write. But I like writing very early on, and then when I uh, went to, got the undergraduate degree. But while I was an undergraduate, I was in poetry workshops, and I really fell in love with the form
Yeah,
instantly. I mean, just instant love. And I still have those friendships from that period in my life, the other people who were writing poetry. So I think then, and we did a lot of readings and stuff too. Like in the area, we were pretty vocal about our love for poetry. So I think that really set me on the path. I've always found it a little hard to think of myself even as an identity. I don't even quite identify. It sounds odd, but I don't even quite identify with my name. As you know, sometimes when I sign a check, I have to think for a minute. Oh, what's my name?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so I think maybe that connects too with multiple genres. It's always kind of a search or a kind of falling into different personalities or different voice
yeah,
rhythms that appeals to me. And I also think sometimes of writing that writing sometimes for me almost feels like erasure. Like it's almost like it's a way to kind of forget trauma or forget things in the past. I mean, they're written down sometimes in disguised form, even disguised from myself, but
yeah,
then I move on to something else. And I like the way that writing gives you a sense as a human being. Maybe it goes back to what you were talking about spiritually, of not being quite possessed in some ways as a human being, because that we're all multiple. We're and in that sense, I think writing is very fulfilling for me. But yeah, I felt about pretty. I didn't really call myself an artist or a poet. Usually, I just call myself a writer because
yeah, yeah.
that's been unending for me. Yeah.
Well, saying you're a writer can communicate everything that anybody needs to know as well, like
Mhm.
about about writing. I gotta tell you, you mentioned poetry. I read your poems even a while ago, and I love your poetry.
Oh,
And
thank you.
another thing about it too is like I think like as an audience, or like for me, just as a person, like receiving art and like writing, is that like like heavy intense relationship, which can be common,
Mhm.
mid-teens through 20s, like poetry. I didn't know what it all meant to me. I knew it was super powerful and super important. I read everything. And then sometime around like doing the podcast the last few years, like I'm bumping into like I'm at Powell's bookstore, I'm in a bookstore in a small press piece. I'm paying attention to these little areas that I might have walked past. and bumping into poetry, and it was like an enlivening again of like in my body of being like,
Yeah.
and I always try to describe poetry for me, but like for me, its power, and I think some philosophers have talked about this. Its power is in like maybe like the execution of words for me to express complexity or profundity or something much bigger. And it's not about economy, even though it is.
Mhm.
It's about like how only the poet can express certain things or certain type of confusions like in this manner. And that's been really powerful for me to go back to like that form and to interview poets. And not that it's mysterious. Right? Where does poetry come from? Humans have been doing this,
Mhm.
for a long time. So I'm just like talking about like a couple distinct times of me inhabiting that poet space and maybe writing and such. But for you, your relationship with poetry over time, is that you feel, is it like your home poetry?
Yes, yes. I loved what you said. I mean, it is, it's a sense in poetry. There's that powerful compression within poetry.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
that's
just, and I often think of it as a kind of whirlpool of energy, drawing us inward. And I think that what's so exciting is that there's so many ways to experience poetry, and there's so many wonderful wonderful poets and so many kind of a voice prints. They say our voice prints are as individual as fingerprints and all, so there's
yeah.
that sense that it's irreducibly human. And I think for me, I have next year, my in 2027, my new and selected poems will be coming out from Saturnalia Books. And so I've
All
been
right.
looking. Yeah, I'm
A
so happy
collection?
about that. I've been putting together a draft of that collection to go to the editor. So I've looked out, through the books of poetry and to see how, there are changes over time, but some of the same obsessions repeat, and the same, love of compression. What was odd for me as someone who also writes novels that are so long is coming out of many, many years of, primarily writing poetry, because poetry is so much focused on the individual word and the line, of course, and rhythmic effects, whereas novels are so many words. I never thought for years I could ever write a novel because
it's
I was
just too it's just
too
too
many
many words
words,
to
too many
combine
words.
properly.
Yeah, and then I was used to writing by ear, and only by ear,
Yeah.
mainly. But the kind of fiction, there's so many ways to write a novel, but the kind of novels that I aspire to write tend to have cause and effect. They tend to have scenes. They tend to have development. And with poetry, I was so used to that sort of impact of compression that it was almost turning everything I learned inside out. But that also
Oh.
was what was exciting about it, to do that, but try to preserve some of the imagistic qualities of poetry within fiction. I think of the great novelist Muriel Spark, a Scottish novelist, who I love her novels for one thing because by and large they're short, and it's just wonderful to read a short, fulfilling
Something to be
novel.
said.
But she said that she was also a poet, and she said that she also thought she called all her novels poems, so she didn't want to make a distinction somehow. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's kind of liberating in some ways, to try to pull off the label. And at the same time, I know for me, it took me a long time to learn how to write a novel. It took me a lot of failed attempts, again and again. And I think I've read every craft book on writing novels that's on the market.
Yeah, that's
I
the way your
really
brains
had to
would work,
figure
because you'd be
out.
like,
Yeah,
how can I
yeah,
crack not the code or something, but how can I crack this a little bit better?
yeah.
Or if
Even
there's
even outlining novels, I'd look at novels and kind of outline, well, how do they do this? And then, of course, when I wrote, I'd kind of throw that all out the window, because you can't write with those strictures.
yeah.
Yeah.
I want to just one more indulgence on poetry.
Mhm.
I've had a couple teachers, professors, one really kind of forced a completely different approach to poetry, which made sense contextually. He was studying
Mhm.
Old English, Middle English poetry. And my professor was so capable of everything. He was a poet himself and everything, but he brought us younger students in and it was like everything was sound. Everything. Everything was sound of the poems because you can kind of understand the language. There's some
Mhm.
translation and stuff. But he was hyper focused at the beginning. It was such a twist for me, being like, listen to this. Like, of course, he could read it really well and it had this, the poetry at that time was like, I'm in the mead hall and here's the poem and
Mhm.
rah, everybody could hear, I mean, not the, and so it was such a wild approach for me because I was like, my, young man brain was so analytical. What's the word mean? You know what I mean? It
Mhm.
was about the puzzle, the Lego bricks of like the words, and he just kind of blew it apart. So, like, I was able to be exposed early, to different type of poetry, but poetry teachers. But I think overall, like, it ended up harmonizing, like hearing that bombastic voice of like the sound. What's the poem sound like? What's it feel like on your skin? Yes. And then the other piece of it being like, look at those words. And what am I thinking about now? I'm thinking about life and death and a hummingbird and like at the same time. And I'm like, so
Yeah.
it was a really kind of like explosive way. And I was frustrated at the beginning. He's like, listen how it sounds. I'm like, I want to know which Viking killed the other one. Like, what's the update in the plot?
Wow.
So it's such a beautiful way to engage with it. But for
Mhm.
you in poetry, like not that it's like it's an either or, but what's your relationship between the sound of it and the meaning words pulled within it? Do you deal with that area a little bit, or is that just in my head?
No, no, your teacher sounds fascinating, and I love that, he pushed against the normal way many people were thinking about poetry. Oh, yeah, I have to have certain sounds working for me, and I guess that's how I test out a poem. I test it out on sound, I think, through multiple drafts more than on sense somehow, because the sound is going to allow me to finally maybe say something I didn't know I could know. So the sound is
Yeah.
always just, I think with poetry is so important, and even with fiction too. I mean, I have to, read portions aloud to see if they work or the dialogue works. But particularly in poetry, the sound is, for me, a kind of leading factor. And because sound is kind of the entryway into the poem for the reader, but for the writer too, and the sound is going to create the little magical possibilities.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. All right. What is art? What is art? Now, you're a creator. You're a creator. You're creating things, right?
Yeah.
Um, uh, indulge me. The I've read your poetry. These the art pieces. What is art?
I know, I don't think I've ever been asked that question before, but I will take a stab, and it's
Of
just going to be a
course, that's all we
stab.
all do as
Okay.
humans. We're
Yeah,
we're very
I
take a
would say
stab.
in some ways art is what escapes definition, and that art is an enhancement and an enlargement of life. And art is a way for human beings to express what otherwise is inexpressible. And I think many things can be art. I think of if you think of like a staircase and a banister, we need that to hold on to. And, that would be enough just to hold on to it if it's sturdy. But if you look so often, at least in parts of the banister, we are tempted to make it artful,
Yeah,
beyond usefulness. We'll create fleur de lis, or we'll, in one way or another, add something to what we have. And that instinct to go beyond what's expected, what's known. That artful instinct, is very human, and we're continually doing that, whether it's writing a poem or it's making a gift. I can remember as a kid, remember how you would paste macaroni on stuff or Playboy,
That's a flashback.
you'd be so proud of it, but
Yeah.
within it is something that you're trying to express. And very often I think art is, even when it's kind of despairing art, is in some ways about love, about wanting love or expressing love. And so often it's in going beyond what is useful into some other
Oh,
area.
yeah.
So that's what I'd say very broadly is art.
Well, when you were talking about, like, there's an aspect, it really pulled it in my head because there's the aspect of the mundane, right? So, like,
Mhm.
for humans, it's not, in many places, it is just enough to be practically efficient
Mhm.
and to do the thing, right? We know that. However, just even in that simple example, you're showing like something, just the basic functionality, practicality to be able to move, and be like, let's create something monumental out of the pieces of that. And that's just like an
Mhm.
instinct that for me, in feeling that, like, poetically, that comes through it. And I'm like, yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Mhm.
It's not just this, it's that as well. And like, are you experiencing art? Or also to stop and look, right? That's the big piece about it, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's so much, I want to say ornamentation, but there's so much growing out of our spaces. Like, you also
Yeah.
have to see it and be like, oh wow, that's beautiful, and step
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, I think art is so much about attention. To create art, you have to be attentive, but to receive art, you have to be attentive too. So that
All right.
art of attention is very much an art also.
All right, everybody. You can't see me right now. I'm taking off my glasses. I want to read the back of The Withers by Lee Upton, because this is coming out June 23rd, 2026. And we just heard, which I didn't know from Lee a little bit earlier, that Lee had been writing this being done back in 2017. But folks, you want to know what it's about? I got to tell you what it's about, and I'm going to ask Lee to just fill in a little bit more. But here we go. In the aftermath of a devastating epidemic, bodies marked with eerie patterns called withers become symbols of a painful past, a past many want to forget. Riata, one of the marked, finds herself cast out, a survivor of controversial surgeries that saved her life but cost her everything else. Seeking refuge, she recovers in the home of a surgeon who once saved her. When she learns his wife is pregnant, a shadow falls over this fragile sanctuary. Ruthless organ traffickers roam the streets, and Riata is drawn into a desperate fight to protect the unborn child and her friends, with what Lisa Gornick calls the creeping terror of a Grimm's fairy tale. The Withers is a haunting exploration of obsession, loss, loyalty, and the fragile threads of memory. In a world plagued by betrayal, can trust ever be reclaimed? Whoa, that's a big one. That's a big description.
Yeah.
So, well, just to enter into it, folks, put this on your radar. We'll have links and everything in the podcast talking about the new work coming out by Lee Upton. But okay, you wrote this way before. You're talking about some stuff that was connected, like maybe up against to the pandemic. But what was it like for you, like, in talking about the Withers, to have created this and being like, what is this? What is this that I've created, and what is this in this world
Well,
over time?
Thanks for reading the back of the novel. Yeah, I started it in 2017, but I was writing it then, through these years. But
Okay,
the whole epidemic, it's an epidemic from a foodborne illness that was already there even before
yep.
COVID. So it was a kind of uncanny when COVID came, because I already had in the novel, there are controversial theories about the epidemic. There are conspiracy theories. There's also questions about the origin of the epidemic, and there's
Mm,
also, in many ways, the novel is about forgetfulness. And I think even with COVID, we tend to forget what people endured and the terrible losses that people have gone through. So that element of the plot was established really early for me, and then through the years while I was written before Tabitha's Day Up was written before Wrongful. It was, it's the third of novel published, but it was the first written, and then rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. But I think that this is how it started for me with this novel. I had seen a newspaper article about a couple who were vacationing overseas who died. When their bodies were brought back to the United States, it was discovered with horror that all their internal organs had been removed.
Oh my gosh.
Now, yeah, that's you can imagine. I remember reading this, and I didn't clip the article or save it on my computer or anything like that. This was quite a while ago, but I just that horror of that kept bothering me. And so I think in some ways the whole novel goes out of this idea of organ trafficking, even as a metaphor or a symbol. I think of, how, I'm talking to a newly engaged man here, but the idea of, I give you my heart, that sense of, how we think about internal organs in a positive, beautiful way. There's
Yeah.
also, with organ trafficking, the absolute horror. The World Health Organization estimates that maybe as many as 20% of organs are trafficked. And there's,
Really?
and there's $1 billion illegal, organ trafficking network.
Yeah.
And, often, really impoverished people are lured for kidneys or part of livers. But, it's yet another form of human trafficking. And so my novel is set in kind of a near future. And so I could imagine that, certain things would happen medically that I could kind of predict. That's how the novel was, in its early form, already predictive of what we later learned with COVID, because it's simply logical that certain things would happen in a culture if there was, say, as in my novel, massive organ failure. And my main character, Riata, she cannot take the antibiotics for this. She cannot have anything but a human organ. What happens in the novel is, though, there are great medical advances, but for certain genetically compromised people like Riata, they're given diseased organs and to see what will happen. So in some ways, she's a kind of guinea pig, but she's
Yeah.
allowed to survive through this. And so it sounds so grim, doesn't it? But it's in some ways a novel about really deep friendship and the best kind of loyalty and a person developing self-trust. People who've read it say it's a slow burn, which I guess it is. I'm establishing a kind of world here, and then things start happening very quickly at a certain point.
No, I'm
But
thoroughly not to
yeah,
interrupt, I'm thoroughly enjoying, the book and the area we're talking about. I think, like, so thinking about philosophy, like, there's all these, like, questions I become fascinated with, but, like, even in the backdrop of, like, almost like humans' general ability to give consent in their situations, right? You think of, like, within economics and, like, the situation that people are in, when you give consent, are you the interaction between forces or two different people, are you truly able to say yes to something that has such an impact? Um,
mhm,
Trafficking element, but being compelled, being forced.
mhm,
And you think about, like, how more personal can you get to, like, my body, like a
mhm,
piece of my body, right? That's as we started to talk about. And there's something primal and freaky just about the, like, just about that idea in general. I didn't realize it was, like, you had mentioned, you said 20%. Oh, so you're saying, like, within the context of organs that show up to be used, about
mhm.
20% are connected to organ trafficking. Is that so?
Yeah. This would be, an international, there can be, medical clinics who are doing this, under the radar. So it is an international trafficking situation. The New York Times did an investigative piece back this past year. I think they updated it in September, but about procurement organizations, even in this country. And organ trafficking is a kind of miracle. It's, saves lives. It's so important. So you realize why the demand is there, and that's important. But they're looking at ethical standards with some organizations, particularly uh, it can be a kind of medical judgment call after circulatory death when the heart stops pumping. How long do you wait? Could the heart wake up again? So,
Mhm.
to try to be really careful, and the ethical procedures are, they have to be, absolutely defined. But one thing is, in the U.S., it's a different team that decides that a human being has died, and before the procurement organization can come in. But the New York Times had some investigations where some relatives felt a bit pressured about organ donation.
That's
Um,
where, yeah, it gets
so there's some
difficult.
questions there, and in the novel, there's a sense that one reason why people reject my main character is she's marked with what are called withers that let people know that she's had a human organ, but then it might have been taken from someone in this future world, not in the world we inhabit, who wasn't truly clinically not alive. So the it's in some ways about being marginalized by what people assume continually, and without you have nothing to protect yourself from that assumption. And in the novel too, there's various controversial theories about people who've undergone the kind of surgery that my character has undergone that are really problematic as well.
Yeah. Well done, Lee. Well done, Lee. Folks, again, the Withers speaking specifically about this, and you get this pre-ordered, and talk to your bookstore or wherever you pre-order your books, because that's so important. And I know you might hear it a lot, listeners, and I'm not trying to be preachy, but for authors putting it out, the readers are, out there. And if you think you're a reader, you want to support, get your name on there. You'll get the book right when it comes out. And also really helps publishers and authors know, like, what's going to go on, like how the splash is going to be at the beginning. And as as any readers might know, there's all sorts of lives for books, and hopefully for authors, the lives of their books start very soon after they're published. So um just really really important to do. And published by Regal House Publishing. So I love, Lee, I got to tell you, one of the pieces I love being a book lover myself is to get the advance and kind of like, I feel like there's like almost like a cultural like peep show of like what's ahead, like in books and stuff. Like, it's such a thrill to me because I feel a vibrancy around literature. I feel a culture around
Mhm.
literature, and when people want to talk books, and you're unapologetic, right? Like you lose it in the books. That's the energy that I feel. I was just in San Francisco. I was at City Lights Books, for crying out loud, in San Francisco. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and the poetry's there, and there's also this social activism, or this is a
Mhm.
spot where people are gonna protest, and like just sitting there, I'm like, books, 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 poetry. It's that powerful to me, and just really appreciate the things you do. I'm gonna hit you with the titular question, the one which can, folks can, you take a stab at it. Is like, actually, Lee Upton, why is there something rather than nothing?
Oh my goodness. I thought I was going to get off free without that, but here I go.
Hey,
On the go.
I'll tell you a funny story about this. I only gave it maybe because I was fearful. There was had Lori Fetrick, who used to be Ice on American Gladiators. Okay, like
Uh-huh.
like gladiator woman. And during it, before I asked the question, something rather than nothing, I said, I ask you this question. And I'm not sure how appreciative you're going to be, but you can also say, fuck off, Ken. I'm not going to answer that question. Well, she took option B.
Well, I'll try. I think that, the thing is that um, it's kind of amazing how we can't have nothing. Like there's never nothing. You move and space fills up. So we don't really have a choice. It's always when one of my daughters was about 3 years old, and I would, something would have happened that she didn't like. She would say something that she'd heard me say in her sweet voice. She'd say, "It's always something." And I love that. It's always something. And
I
I think
love
that's really
that.
true. It's always
Yeah.
something. And it's the same way, how your life can seem like it's going along, and the nothing's tumultuous, and then suddenly you get slapped in the face. So it's always something. So I think, nature abhors a vacuum, but our individual lives, they're just full of a lot of something.
I love that. No, it's thank you so much. Yeah, of course, here everybody, something rather than nothing podcast, up over 300 episodes. I was so excited to get in contact with Lee, and really just appreciate what you write. And I'm actually going to drop down into some more of your poetry. Like I said, I had come in contact with it over time, but there's something about reading somebody's poetry as collected or as sequence, which is just a really nice way to engage. Lee, we're telling folks to, pre-order the book, look around, things like that. Where do folks find you? Because we got to make sure folks find, like, your works, website, things like that, because you've done a lot of great things. So folks need to come in contact with it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful interview. It's been a real joy to talk with you. It really has been.
Same here.
Oh,
Really lovely. Yeah.
well, www.leeupton.com.
Heck yeah.
That's my website. And so from there, and if you just Google Lee Upton, I have doppelgangers. I have I don't know, it's a motorcyclist racer or whatever. So it's kind of exciting. Another Lee
That's
Upton.
not you too? Okay.
That's not me too. So there's, I think, a biochemist, but Lee Upton, and usually, things will come up. But my website, then you can see, what's there and what's coming up.
Thank you, everybody. Lee Upton, poet, writer, artist. We talked too about the different genres of writing. So find out what you want. The comic novels, the comic novel, Tabitha Get Up, and what was the sequel's title again? I saw it.
Yeah, the Tabitha Get Up, and then the sequel is coming out in September, and that's Tabitha Stay Up. And so that'll be really, really exciting, I think. I was nervous about changing her life, but in a sequel, you have to change the life, and her life does change. But, I hope people will enjoy it.
And also literary mystery, Wrongful.
Oh,
So there's
yes.
a lot of
The literary mystery Wrongful is really about, writers behaving badly and publicists behaving badly. And so it was such fun. It's a kind of tribute to Agatha Christie, and I loved writing it, and I love hearing what people think of it. So, yes. So please, Wrongful too. I really would love people to read that as well. Of course,
you love that baby as well.
Oh God, yeah, I love all the babies. Yeah.
So great. Everybody, Lee Upton, honored to have you on something rather than nothing. Everybody, come on, 2026. You probably need to read more books. Books can, I don't know, something. It's a vibe I'm on, so I'm just trying to share it too. Fill up some of your time with the book. The world as it is goofy, as weird, and times violent and intimidating. But books are always there. They're going to be there when the dust and the rubble and everything, comes about. So that's the vibe I get when I'm talking to authors. So Lee, have a wonderful day, and best of luck with things. And everybody, check out Lee Upton's writing. And hope you enjoyed this episode, reaching out from Oregon out to the beautiful state out east of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thanks.
Awesome.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.